Good evening and welcome back to Mr. Chill Chapters. Tonight we leave the well-lit cities behind and journey into the heart of America's circulatory system, its highways. We are venturing into the world of the long-haul trucker, a world of endless asphalt, cheap coffee, and profound, soul-crushing loneliness. These are the men and women who live their lives in the space between places, their only companions the hum of the engine and the ghostly voices crackling over the CB radio. They are the silent sentinels of our economy, but they are also the solitary witnesses to the darkness that thrives on the forgotten roads of this country. They see things in the dead of night, in the vast empty stretches of desert and forest, that the rest of us safe in our beds can only imagine in our worst nightmares. They encounter the strange, the malevolent, and the utterly inexplicable, and often there is no one to tell, no one who would believe them. The stories you are about to hear are drawn from that darkness. These are not urban legends told around a campfire. They are the whispered confessions from greasy truck stop diners, the frantic entries in logbooks, and the chilling final radio calls that were recorded but never explained. These are true, disturbing accounts from the drivers who stare into the abyss of the American night, and sometimes see the abyss stare back. So turn down the lights and check your mirrors. The road ahead is dark, and the journey is long. Story 1. The Cargo That Weeps. My name is Frank. I've been a trucker for 25 years. I've hauled everything from fresh produce to military hardware. I'm an independent owner-operator, which means I take the jobs other drivers won't. The strange routes, the last-minute calls, the no-questions-asked cargo. It pays well, but you learn to live with a certain level of moral ambiguity. But no amount of money could have prepared me for the job I took in the winter of 2011. The offer came through a broker I'd worked with before, a shady but reliable guy named Silas. The job was simple on paper. Pick up a standard 40-foot sealed container from a private research facility in the Nevada desert and transport it to a secure warehouse in Portland, Oregon. The pay was triple the standard rate. There were, however, conditions. The container was fitted with its own specialized silent refrigeration unit that had to be monitored constantly. I was not to stop for more than 30 minutes at a time. I was to stick to a pre-planned route of remote back roads and state highways, avoiding interstates and major cities. And under absolutely no circumstances was I to attempt to open the container or inspect its contents. The bill of lading was vague, listing the cargo only as sensitive geological samples. Handle with extreme care. I've hauled sensitive cargo before. It usually means illegal weapons or untaxed goods. I didn't care. Triple pay was triple pay. I picked up the container from a facility that looked more like a military bunker than a lab. It was surrounded by a high-security fence, and the men who loaded it onto my rig were dressed in sterile, unmarked uniforms. They didn't speak a word, just handed me the paperwork and a satellite phone telling me it was for emergency contact only. The first day of the drive was uneventful, just miles of empty desert highway under a vast, indifferent sky. The container's refrigeration unit hummed along silently, its digital display glowing a steady 10 degrees Celsius. It was on the first night that the strangeness began. I had pulled over for my mandated 30-minute break at a desolate, wind-swept rest stop in northern Nevada. The silence was absolute. I was about to start my engine when I heard it, a sound so out of place, so utterly wrong that my brain initially refused to process it. It was the sound of a woman weeping. It was faint, muffled, but unmistakable. A soft, heartbroken sobbing filled with a grief so profound it made the cold desert air feel even colder. I got out of my cab, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The sound was coming from inside the container. I stood there, frozen, listening to the muffled sobs. My mind raced. Had they loaded a person in there? A kidnapping victim? A political prisoner? The implications were terrifying. I immediately thought of the satellite phone. I should call the police. I should call Silas. But then, the weeping stopped, as suddenly as it had begun. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the container. Silence. Only the faint, almost inaudible hum of the cooling unit. I told myself I was hearing things. The wind, the engine cooling, my own tired mind playing tricks on me. I got back in my truck and drove, pushing the memory down, focusing on the road and the promise of that triple pay. The second night was worse. I was driving through the dense, dark forests of eastern Oregon. The weeping started again. But this time it was different. It wasn't just one woman. It was multiple voices. I could hear the high, terrified sobs of a child, the deep, guttural grief of a man, and the same woman's heartbroken weeping, all overlapping, creating a chorus of pure, unadulterated sorrow. They weren't just crying, they were pleading. The words were muffled, indistinct, but the emotion was crystal clear. A desperate, hopeless plea for help. I pulled over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. This was not my imagination. I grabbed a tire iron from my toolbox and walked to the back of the container. The seal was a heavy-duty, tamper-proof lock with a numbered tag. Breaking it would be a clear violation of my contract. It would also be a crime, but listening to the sound of a child crying in a freezing metal box, I had to know. As I raised the tire iron to smash the lock, the weeping stopped. Instantly, the forest was plunged back into a dead, watchful silence. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was like whatever was in there knew what I was about to do. It was playing with me. I became obsessed. During the day, I would drive like a man possessed, trying to outrun the coming darkness. But as soon as the sun set, the sounds would begin. Sometimes it was weeping. Other times it was angry shouting, the sound of a violent argument taking place just inches away from me. I once heard what sounded like a beautiful, sad song being sung in a language I didn't recognize. The cargo was alive, and it was suffering. On the third and final night, I was less than 100 miles from Portland. I was on a lonely stretch of highway, the rain lashing against my windshield. The sounds from the container started as usual, a low murmur of grief. But then they changed. The weeping turned into screams, not just screams of sorrow, but of pure, abject terror. It sounded like they were being attacked, tortured. I heard a sound like tearing metal, followed by a high-pitched, inhuman shriek that made every hair on my body stand on end. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the contract. I slammed on the brakes, my truck jackknifing slightly on the wet road. I grabbed the satellite phone Silas had given me. I was going to call the police, the FBI, anyone. As I dialed 911, the phone crackled to life. But it wasn't a dispatcher's voice that answered. It was Silas. "Having some trouble with the cargo, Frank?" he asked, his voice unnervingly calm. "Silas, there are people in here. They're screaming," I yelled into the phone. There was a long pause. Then Silas sighed. "Frank, you weren't supposed to get attached. It's just a side effect of the preservation process. It's not real." "What are you talking about? I can hear them." "What you're hearing, Frank," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is an echo. The geological samples you're hauling. They're not rocks. They're a new technology, a way to record and store human consciousness." The subjects were volunteers, terminally ill patients who donated their consciousness to science before they passed. We preserve the final, most intense emotional state, grief, anger, fear. It creates a more stable recording. I stared at the container, the scream still echoing from within. You bottled their dying moments?" We preserved their souls, Frank. A breakthrough. But the playback is a bit raw. The emotional residue sometimes leaks. It manifests as sound. It's not real. There is no one in there, just data. Now, I strongly advise you to finish your delivery. The client is very particular. The line went dead. I sat there in my cab, the rain hammering down, the screams from the container seeming to intensify. Was he telling the truth? Was I hauling a box of ghosts of digital souls trapped in an eternal loop of their own death throes? Or was that just a story to cover up an even more monstrous crime? I didn't know what to believe, but I knew I couldn't deliver this cargo of sorrow. I turned the truck around and started driving towards the nearest state police barracks. As I did, the screams from the container stopped. They were replaced by a single clear voice. A woman's voice speaking right behind my ear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat next to me. "Thank you," she whispered. I never made it to the police. A few miles down the road, two black, unmarked sedans forced me to the side of the road. The same men in sterile uniforms who had loaded the container pulled me from my cab. They didn't hurt me. They were calm, efficient. They took my truck, the container, and my logbook. One of them handed me a briefcase full of cash, far more than the triple pay I was promised. "Your contract is complete, Mr. Franklin," he said, his face impassive. "For your own health and safety, we strongly advise you to forget this delivery ever happened. There was no cargo. There was no weeping. You were never here." They left me on the side of the road in the pouring rain with a briefcase full of money. I never saw my truck again. I never heard from Silas again. I tried to move on, but I can't forget. I can't forget the sound of that child's sobs. I can't forget the woman's voice whispering "thank you" in my ear. I don't know what I was hauling that night. Was it a new technology? Was it a prison for souls? Or was it something far worse? All I know is that some cargo is heavier than its listed weight. And some things once heard can never be unheard. They just become a part of you, a weeping ghost on the lonely highway of your memory. Story 2. The Phantom Toll Booth. My name is Dale. I'm what they call a road dog. Been driving rigs since I was old enough to get a CDL, mostly hauling produce up and down the spine of the country, from the fields of California to the markets of Chicago. I know the highways like the back of my hand. I know the shortcuts, the speed traps, the best diners, and the roads to avoid after dark. There's one road in particular, a lonely, forgotten stretch of old Route 66 in western Oklahoma that most truckers won't touch. They say it's haunted. I used to laugh at those stories. I'm not laughing anymore. It was the summer of 2008, one of those brutally hot years where the asphalt gets soft and sticky. I was behind schedule on a load of tomatoes, and the main interstate, I-40, was shut down due to a massive pileup. The detour was a 100-mile loop. I didn't have the time. Against my better judgment, I decided to take the old highway, the stretch of Route 66 that runs parallel to the interstate. It was a ghost road, bypassed by progress, littered with the skeletal remains of abandoned motels and gas stations. But it was a straight shot, and I figured I could make up for lost time. The sun was setting as I turned my rig onto the cracked, faded asphalt of the old route. The silence was immediate and profound. The constant roar of interstate traffic was gone, replaced by the lonely hum of my engine. For the first hour, it was just me and the ghosts of the past. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of gray through a landscape of red dirt and endless sky. It was well after midnight when I saw it. Up ahead, shimmering in the heat haze rising from the road, were lights. A toll booth. I frowned, confused. There had never been a toll booth on this stretch of road. It was a free highway. I checked my GPS. It showed my truck sitting in the middle of an empty, uninterrupted road. There was no structure, no toll plaza, nothing. Yet there it was right in front of me, blocking the entire road. It was an old-fashioned toll booth, the kind you might have seen in the 1950s. It was a single, small wooden booth with a swinging barrier arm. A single bare yellow light bulb cast a sickly glow over the scene. As I slowed my truck to a stop, a figure emerged from the booth. He was an old man, impossibly thin, dressed in a crisp, clean, but hopelessly outdated uniform. He had a kind, wrinkled face and eyes that seemed to hold a deep, weary sadness. He walked over to my window, his movements slow and deliberate. "Evening, driver," he said. His voice a soft, dusty rasp, like the sound of dry leaves skittering across pavement. "That'll be the toll." "The toll?" I asked, still trying to make sense of the situation. "Friend, there's no toll on this road. I think you've got your wires crossed." The old man smiled, a gentle, patient smile. "There's always a toll on this road, son, always has been. The price is one memory." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "One memory? What are you talking about? You want money, right? How much is it?" I started reaching for my wallet. "We don't take money here," he said, his smile never wavering. "Money is temporary. Memories have weight. They have value. Just one. A small one will do. Your first kiss, the taste of your mother's apple pie, the day you got your first dog. Just place the memory in your hand and hold it out to me." This had to be a joke, a prank, or maybe the old man was crazy, a local eccentric who had set up a fake toll booth in the middle of the night. I was tired, I was behind schedule, and I wasn't in the mood for games. "Look, old-timer," I said, my patience wearing thin. "I don't have time for this. Just lift the gate and let me pass." The old man's smile faded, replaced by that profound sadness I had seen in his eyes. "I can't do that," he whispered. "The road doesn't open until the toll is paid. It's the rule." I was about to argue further, to threaten to call the police, when I looked past him at the toll booth. Through its small, grimy window, I could see inside. It wasn't empty. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were hundreds, maybe thousands, of glass jars of all shapes and sizes. And inside each jar was a shimmering, swirling ball of faint-colored light. Some glowed a warm, happy yellow, others a deep, sorrowful blue, some pulsed with a fiery, angry red. My heart skipped a beat. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic what I was looking at. I was looking at his collection. I was looking at the memories. A cold fear, colder than any winter night, began to creep up my spine. This was not a prank. This was not a crazy old man. This was something else. Something ancient and wrong. I looked at the barrier arm blocking my path. It seemed solid, real. I considered just plowing through it, but a deep, instinctual fear held me back. The kind of fear that tells you not to step off a cliff in the dark. "Just one," the old man repeated, his voice gentle again. "It doesn't have to be an important one. The road is hungry. It needs to be fed." I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. I thought about reversing, but the idea of turning my back on this thing was terrifying. I decided to play along. What harm could it do? It was all just crazy talk. "Fine," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "You want a memory? Here." I thought of something trivial, something meaningless. The memory of watching a boring movie on TV last week. I closed my eyes, focused on the memory, and then held out my open palm, feeling like a complete fool. The old man reached out and, without touching my skin, seemed to scoop something invisible from my palm. As he did, I felt a strange, faint tingling sensation, like a static shock. He brought his hand to his mouth and seemed to inhale. His sad eyes fluttered shut for a moment, and a look of faint satisfaction crossed his face. "Ah," he sighed. Not very flavorful. A bit bland, but it will do. The toll is paid. And then, the memory was gone. I mean, completely gone. I knew I had just given him a memory of watching a movie, but I couldn't remember what movie it was. I couldn't remember what it was about, who was in it, or even what night I had watched it. There was just a blank space in my mind where that memory used to be. A clean, neat, surgical hole. The fear I felt then was so intense, so absolute, that I almost passed out. This was real. He had literally taken a piece of my mind. The old man smiled his sad smile one last time. "Thank you for your custom, driver," he said. "The road is open." He walked back to his booth, and the barrier arm swung upwards with a silent, smooth motion. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, and my truck roared past the phantom toll booth. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I drove for hours, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes wide with terror. When the sun finally rose, I pulled over and checked my GPS. It showed my entire route from the night before. A single, unbroken line along old Route 66. There was no record of me ever stopping. There was no toll booth on the map. It was as if it had never happened. But I knew it had, because the hole in my memory was still there. A small, insignificant blank spot, but a hole nonetheless. I never took that shortcut again. I tell the younger drivers to stay off that stretch of road, but they just laugh at me, call me a superstitious old fool. But sometimes I wonder about the old man in his lonely booth. Is he still out there, collecting his strange and terrible toll? And what does he do with all those memories? Does he live them? Does he feed on them? And I wonder about the road itself. The old man said it was hungry. What happens if a driver comes along who has no memories to give? A person who is already empty? What toll does the road demand from them? I think about the jars I saw, the ones that glowed with that angry, fiery red. Were those memories taken, or were they given willingly? Were there drivers who paid with their most painful moments just to be free of them? A memory of a terrible accident, a lost love, a violent crime. What a tempting offer that must be for someone haunted by their past. To simply hand it over and have the hole in your mind be a relief, not a violation. I lost a small, worthless memory that night. But I gained a new one, a memory of a lonely road, a sad old man, and a terrible, hungry silence. And that is one memory I know I will carry with me to my grave. It's the toll I pay every time I close my eyes and see the endless empty highway stretching out before me. Story 3. The Highway Hypnosis. My name is Ray. I've been driving long haul for 30 years, and in that time I've seen it all. Or so I thought. I've seen blizzards in the Rockies that could bury a rig in minutes, and I've seen heat in the Mojave that could cook an egg on the dashboard. I'm a creature of logic, of diesel and steel. I believe in what I can see and touch. But one night, on a dead straight, mind-numbingly boring stretch of I-80 in Nebraska, I experienced something that shattered my understanding of time, distance, and reality itself. Every long-haul driver knows about highway hypnosis. It's a real, documented phenomenon. You're driving for hours on a monotonous road, the white lines flashing by, the hum of the engine a constant drone. Your mind goes into a kind of trance, an autopilot mode. You're still driving, still reacting to traffic, but you're not fully there. Then you snap out of it and realize you can't remember the last 50 or 60 miles. It's unnerving, but it's a known occupational hazard. What happened to me was not highway hypnosis, it was something else. It was a clear, cold night in late October. I was hauling a load of machine parts from Chicago to Salt Lake City. The stretch of I-80 that cuts through Nebraska is famous among truckers for being one of the most boring drives in America. It's flat, it's straight, and it goes on forever. It's the perfect breeding ground for highway hypnosis. I remember passing the exit for Kearney, Nebraska. I checked the time on my dashboard clock. It was exactly 1:15 a.m. I remember it vividly because I was calculating my arrival time in Cheyenne, Wyoming, where I planned to stop for my main rest break. I had a full tank of fuel, a fresh cup of coffee, and about 300 miles of straight, empty road ahead of me. I settled in for the long, quiet drive. The next thing I remember is a jolt, a sudden, violent shudder that ran through the entire rig as if I'd hit a massive pothole. But the road was smooth, my eyes snapped into focus. The coffee cup in my holder had spilled, splashing hot liquid across the console. My heart was hammering in my chest. I looked at the dashboard clock. It read 1:45 a.m. 30 minutes had passed. I blinked, trying to clear my head. I must have zoned out, a classic case of highway hypnosis. I shook my head, annoyed at myself for losing that much time. I must have covered about 30, maybe 35 miles. Then I saw the road sign. It was a large green sign illuminated by my headlights. It read, Cheyenne, 15 miles. I stared at the sign, my mind refusing to compute. Cheyenne. That was impossible. Cheyenne was nearly 300 miles from Kearney. To cover that distance in 30 minutes, I would have had to have been traveling at almost 600 miles per hour. My blood ran cold. This wasn't highway hypnosis. This was a complete and total break from reality. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I looked at my GPS. The small icon of my truck was placidly moving along I-80 just east of Cheyenne. According to the satellite in the sky, I had indeed traveled 285 miles in half an hour. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the clock was broken. Maybe the sign was wrong. Maybe I had misread the sign back in Kearney. But I knew in my gut that none of those things were true. I had lost something. Not just time, but a huge, impossible chunk of the journey. I needed to get off the road. I took the next exit and pulled into a large, brightly lit truck stop. I felt a desperate need to be around people, to be anchored in the real world. I stumbled out of my cab, my legs feeling unsteady. The air was cold and crisp, much colder than it should have been. As I walked towards the diner, I did my routine walk-around inspection of my rig. It was a habit, something to ground me. And that's when I saw the damage. The front of my truck, the massive chrome grille and bumper, was not clean. It was covered in a strange, dark, fibrous material. It looked like organic matter, and it was smeared with a thick, dark, viscous fluid that was not oil or grease. It was almost black in the dim light, and it had a faint coppery smell. The smell of blood. But that wasn't the worst of it. Embedded in the grille, wedged between the chrome bars, were long, coarse black hairs. And there were deep, gouge-like scratches across the front of the truck, as if something large and powerful had clawed at the metal. These were not the marks of hitting a deer or an elk. I had hit deer before. This was different. The scratches were too deep, the pattern too deliberate. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What had I hit? What had happened in those 270 miles of lost time? I had no memory of an impact. No memory of anything except the road and then the jolt. I stumbled into the diner and ordered a coffee I didn't want. I sat in a booth trying to piece things together. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with a kind face, must have seen the look on my face. "Rough night, honey?" she asked as she refilled my cup. "You have no idea," I muttered. "Tell me something. Is there anything strange on the highway between here and Kearney? Any big animals? Anything out of the ordinary?" She gave me a long, strange look. "You a trucker?" I nodded. "You one of the ones who sees it, then?" "Sees what?" I asked, leaning forward. She lowered her voice. "There are stories. Been around for years. Truckers, mostly. They talk about losing time on that stretch of I-80, big chunks of it. They call it the Wyoming Jump. Some say it's a government experiment. Others say it's aliens, the old-timers, the native folks around here. They say it's an old road, a spirit road. And sometimes, if you're not paying attention, you can slip onto it. A spirit road, I said, the words feeling foolish on my tongue. A road that doesn't follow our rules of time and space, she said, her eyes serious. They say things still walk that road, things from the old world, big dark things. And they don't like trespassers. I thought of the front of my truck, the blood, the hair, the claw marks. I spent the rest of the night in that truck stop, too terrified to get back on the road. I searched online on the diner's slow Wi-Fi. I found forums, hidden corners of the internet where truckers shared stories they wouldn't dare tell anyone else. And there it was. Dozens of accounts, all eerily similar to mine. Drivers losing hours of time on I-80. Waking up hundreds of miles from where they thought they were. And the most disturbing detail, the one that made my blood run cold. Many of them reported finding strange, unexplainable damage to the front of their rigs. Some described hitting a huge, dark shape that seemed to vanish on impact. One post from a driver 10 years prior described finding long, black, coarse hairs and deep claw marks on his grill. He had sent a sample of the hair to a lab. The results came back inconclusive. The DNA did not match any known animal on Earth. I went back to my truck as the sun was rising. I took a sample of the dark fluid and the hairs, carefully placing them in a plastic bag. I spent hours scrubbing the front of my rig, trying to erase the evidence of my impossible journey. But I couldn't erase the scratches in the metal, or the hole in my memory. I delivered my load in Salt Lake City and tried to forget, but I couldn't. I sent the samples to a private lab claiming I had hit an unidentified animal. The results came back a week later. The fluid was blood, but its cellular structure was bizarre, containing elements that the lab couldn't identify. And the hair, the DNA analysis was a dead end. It was mammalian, but it did not match any species in any existing database. I now believe the waitress was right. I don't think I was on I-80 for those 30 minutes. I think I slipped into somewhere else. A place that runs parallel to our own. A road that operates on a different kind of time. And on that road I hit something. Something big, something dark, and something that was not of this world. I didn't just experience highway hypnosis. I drove through a tear in reality. I still drive for a living. But I will never ever take I-80 through Nebraska at night again. I will take the long detour. I will lose the time. Because I know now that there are worse things to lose on that road than a few hours. You can lose your sense of reality. You can lose your sanity. And sometimes, you come back with proof that the monsters that haunt our oldest stories are not just stories. They are real. And they are still out there, walking the ancient unseen roads that crisscross our own. And they do not take kindly to being hit by a 40-ton truck. Story 4. The Doppelganger at the Truck Stop. My name is Sam. Or at least I think it is. After what happened at the Crossroads truck stop off a forgotten highway in rural Montana, I'm not sure of anything anymore, least of all myself. Truck stops are a trucker's sanctuary. They are islands of light, life, and greasy food in an ocean of darkness and asphalt. They have their own culture, their own rhythm. You see the same faces, the same tired eyes, the same weary slump of the shoulders. You learn to recognize your fellow travelers, the road dogs who share your lonely life. But the Crossroads. The Crossroads was different. It wasn't a sanctuary, it was a trap. And it was there that I came face to face with a horror more intimate and terrifying than any ghost or monster myself. It was late November, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I was hauling a load of lumber from Seattle to Minneapolis, a route I'd driven 100 times. A sudden vicious snowstorm had closed the main interstate, forcing me onto a network of state highways that snaked through the mountains. I was tired, hungry, and my fuel was running low. When I saw the faint, flickering neon sign for the Crossroads Truck Stop and Diner, it felt like a miracle. The place was old, the kind of establishment that time had forgotten. The sign was missing a few letters, reading C.S. Road's Uck Stop. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few other rigs slumbering under a blanket of fresh snow. The diner itself was a long, low building, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting yellow light. It looked like a perfect refuge from the storm. I parked my rig and trudged through the snow into the diner. The place was clean but worn. The red vinyl on the booths was cracked and the air smelled of stale coffee and bacon grease. A single tired-looking waitress was wiping down the counter. A couple of other truckers were hunched over their meals, their faces hidden in shadow. It was a typical, unremarkable scene. I slid into a booth and ordered a coffee and a steak. As I waited for my food, I glanced out the window at my truck. It was a Peterbilt 379, my pride and joy. I'd customized it myself. It had a distinctive deep blue paint job with a silver eagle painted on the side of the cab. It was one of a kind. As I was admiring my rig, another trucker walked out of the diner and headed towards the parking lot. He was about my height, my build, wearing the same brand of worn leather jacket I had on. He walked with the same slight limp I've had since a loading accident years ago. And he walked directly to my truck. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, unlocked the driver's side door, and climbed into the cab. I sat there frozen, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. Was someone stealing my truck right in front of me? I jumped up from the booth, ready to run outside and confront the thief. But then he turned his head and looked back towards the diner. And in the dim light of the parking lot, I saw his face. It was my face. It was me. Every line, every scar, the small mole next my left eye. It was a perfect, identical copy of the face I see in the mirror every morning. He looked at the diner, then started the engine of my truck, and slowly pulled out of the parking lot, disappearing into the swirling snow. I sank back into the booth, my mind a screaming vortex of confusion and terror. I checked my pockets. My keys were gone. My wallet was gone. My ID was gone. I was a ghost. I had just watched myself steal my own life. The waitress came over with my steak. She must have seen the look of pure horror on my face. "Everything okay, hun?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of any real concern. "My truck," I stammered. "Someone just... He looked just like me. He took my truck." She just nodded slowly, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "Happens," she said, placing the plate in front of me. "The Crossroads takes what it needs, and it gives what it can." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Call the police. Someone just stole my rig." She sighed, a weary, ancient sound. "There's no phone service out here, honey, no law either, not the kind you're used to. This place, it's a weigh station. But we don't weigh your cargo, we weigh your soul." I stared at her, convinced I was having a breakdown, a psychotic episode brought on by exhaustion. But her eyes were clear, calm, and filled with a terrible, ancient knowledge. "Look around," she said, gesturing to the other truckers in the diner. "See that fella in the corner? Came in here 3 years ago. Name was Bill. A happy man, loved his family, but he was tired. So tired of the road. The next morning, a new Bill walked out, one who didn't remember his family, didn't remember anything but the road. The old Bill, he's still here. Works in the kitchen now, peels potatoes. He's empty, but he's at peace." I looked at the man in the corner. He was staring blankly at his plate, his eyes vacant. I looked at the cook in the kitchen, a hollowed-out man going through the motions. I realized with a sickening lurch that the truck stop was populated by them, the discarded selves, the husks. This place is a crossroads, literally, the waitress continued, her voice a low drone, a place between realities. People come here when they're at a breaking point, when they can't go on as they are. The crossroads offers a deal. It creates a new you, a version of you that can handle the road, a version that doesn't have your pain, your regrets, your exhaustion. That new you gets to take your truck, your life, and drive away. And the old you get to stay here, you get to rest. Forever. The horror of it was so immense, so absolute that I couldn't even scream. I had been tired. God, I had been so tired. For months I had been dreaming of a different life, a life off the road, a life where I could just stop, and the crossroads had heard me. It had answered my secret, desperate prayer. It had created a version of me who wasn't tired, a version who could keep driving. And it had left me behind. But my life, I whispered, my wife, my kids, what about them? The waitress's expression softened for the first time, a flicker of genuine pity in her eyes. The new you, he'll take care of them. He's still you in a way. He has your memories. He just doesn't have your weariness. He'll be a better husband, a better father. He won't be tired all the time. He won't carry the weight of the road home with him. I was a phantom, a discarded draft of a person. The life I had built, the love I had shared was now being lived by an imposter, a copy who was a better version of me. And I was trapped here in this greasy spoon at the end of reality with the other lost souls. I spent what felt like days in that diner. Time seemed to move differently there. The storm outside never stopped. The same few truckers sat in the same booths. The waitress never seemed to sleep. I watched new truckers pull in, their faces etched with the same bone-deep weariness I had felt. I watched them sit in my booth, and sometimes I would see them look out the window with a look of pure, uncomprehending terror as they watched themselves climb into their own rigs and drive away. I learned the rules of the place. The discarded selves, the husks. We could not leave. The diner was our world. We worked in the kitchen, we cleaned the floors, we fueled the trucks of the new selves who were passing through. We were the ghosts that kept the place running. We didn't need to sleep much, we didn't need to eat much. We were running on the fumes of the lives we used to have. One day a new trucker came in. He was young, barely a kid, but his eyes held that familiar soul-deep exhaustion. He sat in my old booth. He ordered a coffee. And he looked out the window. I saw the moment it happened. The moment he saw his doppelganger walk out to his truck. The color drained from his face. He looked around the diner, his eyes wild with panic. His eyes met mine. In that moment, I had a choice. I could let him suffer the same fate as me. I could let him become another ghost in this purgatory. Or I could try to fight back. I walked over to his table. "My name is Sam," I said, my voice feeling strange and rusty. "Listen to me very carefully. This place is a lie. The person in your truck is not you. You have to fight it. You have to want your life back. You have to want it more than you want rest." The kid stared at me, his mouth agape. The waitress shot me a look of pure venom from behind the counter. "He's crazy," she said to the kid. "Don't listen to him. Just finish your coffee. Rest a while." "Don't listen to her," I insisted, my voice growing stronger. "She's part of the trap. Your life is out there, in that truck. You have to claim it. You have to prove to this place that you are the real you." Something in my words must have broken through his terror. A spark of defiance lit up in his eyes. He stood up, knocking over his chair. "That's my truck," he yelled, his voice cracking but firm. "That's my life." He ran out of the diner screaming, charging towards the truck where his double was just starting the engine. I ran to the window to watch. The doppelganger got out of the cab. The two of them stood there face to face in the swirling snow, identical in every way. They didn't fight with their fists. They just stared at each other. It was a battle of wills, a silent psychic war over who had the greater claim to existence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one of them began to fade, the doppelganger. His form became translucent, shimmering, like a heat haze. He looked at the kid with a look of sad resignation, then simply dissolved into the falling snow. The kid, the real kid, stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then he climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove away, back into the storm, back into his life. I had done it. I had helped someone escape. As I turned back from the window, the waitress was standing right behind me. Her face was not angry. It was impressed. "No one has ever done that before," she said quietly. "You reminded him who he was, which means you must still remember who you are." A strange feeling washed over me, a warmth, a sense of self that I hadn't felt since I first walked into this place. I looked down at my hands. They seemed more solid. "The crossroads has rules," the waitress said, a strange, thin smile on her lips. "It only keeps the ones who are willing to be forgotten. You, Sam, you are not willing. You have interfered. You have broken the equilibrium. And for that, there is a price." "What price?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound again. "The price is a choice," she said. "Your double, the new you, has been driving your rig for weeks now. He's almost home. He's a good man, Sam. He's not tired. He sings to your kids, and he remembers your wife's birthday. He's the you she always wanted. You can stay here, you can rest, and he can give them the life you were too weary to provide. Or you can take it back." She pointed to the door. "The storm has stopped. The road is open. You can walk out of here right now. You can try to get back to them. But you have to understand. If you choose to leave, you take your weariness with you. You take your pain, your regrets, your exhaustion. You take the weight of the road. And he, the other you, will cease to exist the moment you step off this property. You will be erasing the happy man and replacing him with the broken one. So, what will it be, Sam? Your peace, or their happiness?" I stood there at the crossroads of my own soul. The choice was so monstrous, so impossible, that it felt like my mind was splitting in two. To stay here in this quiet, painless purgatory and let my family have the better version of me? Or to reclaim my life, my love, my identity, but condemn them to having the tired, broken man I had become? I walked to the door. I put my hand on the handle, and I made my choice. My name is Sam, and I am so tired. Tory 5, the girl in the reflection. My name is Miguel. I haul logs in British Columbia, up in the Northern Territories. It's a tough job, a lonely job. The roads up there are not like the highways down south. They are narrow, winding ribbons of asphalt cut through an endless ancient forest. They call Highway 16 the Highway of Tears for a reason. Dozens of women, mostly indigenous, have vanished or been found murdered along that route since the 1970s. Every driver knows the stories. Every driver feels the weight of that sorrow. It soaks into the very pavement. We try not to think about it. We turn up the radio, focus on the road, and pray we don't become another story ourselves. But some stories refuse to be ignored. Some ghosts demand to be seen. It was a cold, rainy evening in early spring. I was driving my empty rig south from Prince Rupert, heading back to my depot in Prince George. The rain was relentless, a gray sheet that turned the world into a blurry watercolor painting of dark green and black. The highway was deserted. It was just me, the rhythmic thump of my windshield wipers, and the oppressive, watchful silence of the forest. It was on a particularly long, straight stretch surrounded by a dense wall of cedar and fir trees that I first saw her. It wasn't on the road. It was in my passenger side mirror. For a split second, as I glanced at the mirror to check my position, I saw a face reflected in the glass. A young woman's face. She was pale, with long dark hair plastered to her skin by the rain. Her eyes were wide with a desperate, pleading terror. Her mouth was open as if in a silent scream. She was looking directly at me. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. My rig skidded on the wet asphalt, the trailer groaning in protest. I thought I had hit someone, a hitchhiker who had stumbled onto the road. I threw open my door and jumped out into the pouring rain, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. There was no one there. The road behind me was empty. The dense forest on either side was still and silent, except for the dripping of the rain. I walked the length of my truck, my light scanning every inch of the road, the shoulder, the ditch. Nothing, not a footprint, not a broken branch, nothing. I stood there, soaked to the bone, my heart pounding. It had been so real. The face in the mirror had been as clear as my own reflection. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the hypnotic rhythm of the wipers. I got back in my cab, shaken, and continued my drive, my eyes now constantly flicking to the passenger side mirror. For an hour there was nothing but the reflection of the wet, empty road. I started to relax. It had just been my mind playing tricks on me. Then she appeared again. The same face, the same pale skin, the same dark, wet hair, the same terrified eyes. This time she was closer, her face filling the entire mirror. And this time I could see the details. There was a bruise on her cheek, a dark, ugly purple against her pale skin. There was a cut on her lip, and around her neck. There was something dark, a ligature, a rope, or a belt pulled tight. I didn't break this time. I was too scared. I just stared at the reflection, my hands gripping the steering wheel. She was mouthing a word over and over again. Her silent scream was forming a name. Help me. I blinked and she was gone. I was no longer trying to rationalize it. This was not a hallucination. I was seeing a ghost in my mirror. I felt a wave of cold, supernatural dread, but it was mixed with something else, a profound, overwhelming sadness. This was not a malevolent spirit. This was a victim, a soul trapped in a moment of pure terror, replaying her final moments in the reflection of a passing truck. I thought about turning back, about going to the police, but what would I tell them, that I saw a ghost in my mirror? They would think I was crazy or drunk. I decided to keep driving, to get to Prince George, to the light and safety of the city. I tried not to look at the mirror, but it was like a magnet pulling my gaze. She appeared a third time, about 30 minutes later. This time it wasn't just her face. The reflection in the mirror changed completely. For a few terrifying seconds, I was no longer looking at the road behind me. I was looking into the cab of another vehicle, an old beat-up pickup truck. The interior was dirty, the dashboard cracked. The girl was in the passenger seat and she was fighting for her life. A man, a silhouette with no face, was in the driver's seat, his arm around her neck, pulling something tight. I could see her hands clawing at his arm, her eyes wide with a final desperate plea. The reflection shattered, returning to the normal view of the empty road, but the image was burned into my brain. I had just witnessed her murder. I was weeping now, tears mixing with the rain on my face. I was no longer just a witness. I felt like a participant. Her terror was my terror. Her despair was my despair. I knew I couldn't just keep driving. I had to do something. But what? As I was wrestling with my fear and my conscience, she appeared one last time. But this time her expression had changed. The terror was gone, replaced by a look of calm, determined instruction. She was no longer looking at me. She was looking past me at the road ahead. She raised a ghostly, translucent hand and pointed. She was pointing at a small, unmarked dirt turnoff, barely visible in the darkness, a small logging road that disappeared into the dense forest. Then she faded away for the last time. I knew what she was telling me to do. It was a crazy, reckless idea. To turn my massive rig down a dark, unknown logging road in the middle of a storm, based on the instruction of a ghost. But I felt I had no choice. I was bound to her now. I had to see this through to the end. I slowed the truck and with a deep breath, turned down the dirt road. The road was narrow and muddy, the branches of the ancient trees scraping against the sides of my trailer. My headlights cut a weak tunnel through the oppressive darkness. I drove for what felt like an eternity, deeper and deeper into the silent, waiting forest. After about a mile, the road ended in a small, muddy clearing. In the center of the clearing was a single, massive, ancient cedar tree. I stopped the truck, its engine the only sound in the world. I got out, my flashlight beam dancing nervously across the trees. There was nothing there, just mud, rain, and trees. Had I been wrong? Had I just followed a ghost on a fool's errand into the middle of nowhere? I was about to turn around when my flashlight beam caught something on the ground near the base of the giant cedar tree. It was a small silver locket half buried in the mud. My hand was shaking as I picked it up. It was old and tarnished, but it opened. Inside there were two tiny faded photographs. One was of an older smiling couple. The other was of the girl from my mirror. In the photo, she was smiling, her eyes bright and full of life. On the back, a name was faintly engraved. Jessica. I knew then what I had to do. I got back in my truck and with great difficulty managed to turn it around and get back to the highway. I didn't drive to Prince George. I drove to the nearest Royal Canadian Mounted Police detachment in a small town called Burns Lake. I walked into the station, muddy, soaked, and probably looking half crazy. I placed the silver locket on the front desk. The officer on duty, a stern-looking man with a tired face, looked at the locket, then at me. I told him everything. The face in the mirror, the murder I witnessed, the ghost pointing the way. I expected him to laugh, to call for a breathalyzer, but he didn't. He just listened, his expression growing more and more grim. When I was done, he picked up the locket and opened it. He stared at the picture of the smiling girl for a long time. "Jessica Winters," he said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that felt as old as the forest. "She went missing from Highway 16 5 years ago. She was a student hitchhiking home for the holidays. We found her pickup truck abandoned on the side of the road. We never found her." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than professional detachment in his eyes. "You say she showed you where to go?" I nodded. The next day I led a team of RCMP officers and a forensics unit back down that dark, muddy logging road. At the base of the giant cedar tree, right where I had found the locket, they began to dig. They didn't have to dig far. They found her. Jessica Winters was finally going home. The investigation was reopened. The details of my experience were kept out of the official report. The official story was that an anonymous tip had led them to the location. But the officers who were there that day, they knew. They looked at me differently, with a mixture of awe and fear. They never found her killer. The trail was too cold, but they found her. They gave her family a place to mourn. They gave her a name again instead of just another statistic on the highway of tears. I still drive that highway. I have to. It's my job. But I'm not afraid anymore. The ghost in my mirror has never appeared again. I think she's at peace now. But I know she's not the only one out there. There are other voices, other faces trapped in the sorrow of that lonely road. Sometimes late at night, When the rain is falling and the forest presses in on all sides, I'll turn down my radio, and I'll listen. I'll listen for the whispers on the wind, for the faces in the reflection. Because on the highway of tears, sometimes the only witness to a crime is the road itself, and sometimes it finds a way to tell its story. Story 6. The Silent Broadcast. My name is Gary. I'm a company man, been driving for the same freight corporation for 15 years. I'm not an old-timer who waxes poetic about the good old days of trucking. I like modern rigs, I like GPS, and I like my satellite radio. But there's one piece of old tech I've always kept in my cab, my CB radio. Most of the young drivers don't bother with them anymore, but for guys my age, the CB is a lifeline. It's the voice of the road, a community of ghosts in the static, sharing information about speed traps, accidents, and sometimes just keeping a lonely driver awake through a long, dark night. I always kept mine on, tuned to the emergency channel, more out of habit than anything else. I never imagined that one night that familiar crackling voice of the road would be replaced by a silence more terrifying than any scream. It happened on a cross-country haul, somewhere in the vast, empty plains of West Texas. It was one of those nights where the world feels like it's been stripped down to its bare essentials. A black ribbon of highway, a black dome of sky, and the lonely bubble of my cab. The airwaves were quiet. It was too late for most of the chatter, too early for the dawn patrol. There was just the gentle, rhythmic hiss of empty static from my CB, a sound I found as comforting as a sleeping dog. The change was subtle at first. The static didn't stop. It thinned. The familiar random crackle and pop began to smooth out, replaced by a low, almost subaudible hum. It was a clean, pure, and deeply unnatural sound. It was the sound of an open channel, a broadcast with no one speaking. A dead signal. I picked up the mic. "Breaker 19, anyone got a copy?" I asked, my voice sounding loud in the quiet cab. Nothing. Just that clean, empty hum. I tried again. "This is Roadhog, heading eastbound on I-20, just doing a radio check." Silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It felt heavy, expectant, like holding your breath, waiting for a sound you know is coming. I fiddled with the squelch knob, trying to bring back the familiar, comforting static, but the hum remained. A perfect, unwavering tone just at the edge of my hearing. I figured it was some kind of atmospheric interference, a strange weather phenomenon, and tried to ignore it. But I couldn't. The longer the hum continued, the more it began to affect me. It was like a low-frequency vibration that was seeping into my skull. I started to feel agitated. A low-grade, simmering paranoia began to bubble up inside me. Every pair of headlights that appeared in my rearview mirror felt like a threat. Was that car following me? Why was that truck staying in the lane next to me for so long? These were normal, fleeting thoughts for a trucker, but now they felt sharp, real, and urgent. My palms started to sweat. My heart rate kicked up a notch. After about an hour of this, another voice finally broke the silence on the CB. It was a young driver, his voice tinny and panicked. "Breaker, breaker, is anyone else hearing this? This quiet, it's driving me crazy." Before I could respond, another voice cut in, this one older, angrier. "Shut up, kid, you're breaking the signal, can't you hear it?" "Hear what?" the kid asked, his voice trembling. "It's just nothing." "It's not nothing, you idiot," the second voice snarled. "It's a message. You just have to listen, right? Now get off the channel." A strange, hostile argument erupted on the airwaves. More drivers joined in, their voices filled with a bizarre, uncharacteristic aggression. They weren't talking about traffic or weather. They were arguing about the silence itself. Some, like the kid, were freaked out by it. Others, like the angry driver, seemed to be hearing something in the silence, something they believed was a profound message, and they were becoming violently protective of it. "It's a government mind control signal," one driver shouted. "No, it's a sign, the rapture is coming," another screamed. The chatter devolved into a mess of insults, threats, and paranoid rants. I had never heard anything like it. The camaraderie of the road had vanished, replaced by a raw, ugly paranoia. And all the while, underneath their frantic voices was that same steady, unnerving hum. I started to feel it more strongly myself. The paranoia was getting worse. I felt like the other trucks on the road were boxing me in, their drivers watching me, judging me. I felt a surge of irrational anger at a car that passed me too quickly. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I was becoming one of them. With a surge of will, I reached over and switched the CB radio off. The silence in my cab was a relief. The heavy humming pressure in my skull receded. The paranoia began to fade, replaced by a shaky, cold clarity. It was the radio. The signal, the silent broadcast, was doing this to us. It was somehow amplifying and weaponizing the natural fear and isolation of the road, turning us against each other. I drove for another hour in silence, feeling my sanity slowly return. I decided to pull into the next truck stop to get some real coffee and clear my head completely. I pulled off the interstate and into a large, well-lit Flying J truck stop. The parking lot was unusually full for that time of night. And the atmosphere was wrong. There were no friendly waves, no nods of recognition. Truckers were standing in small, tense groups, arguing heatedly. Others were pacing around their rigs, muttering to themselves, their eyes darting around suspiciously. A fist fight broke out near the fuel pumps between two drivers over a perceived slight. The air was thick with a toxic, palpable hostility. I walked into the diner. Every trucker inside was sitting alone, hunched over their tables, glaring at anyone who made eye contact. The normal low murmur of conversation was gone. The only sound was the clinking of cutlery and the low, almost inaudible hum coming from the small CB radio behind the counter. They were all still listening to it. I realized then that this wasn't just happening on the airwaves. The signal had infected this entire place. It was an epidemic of paranoia. I was about to turn and leave when I saw a man sitting in a corner booth. He was older, with a long gray beard, and he was the only person in the entire diner who looked calm. He was methodically taking apart a CB radio on the table in front of him, his movements precise and practiced. He looked up and his eyes met mine. He gave me a small, sad smile and gestured for me to join him. "You turned yours off, didn't you?" he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "I can see it. You don't have the stare yet." "What is going on?" I asked, sliding into the booth. "What is this signal?" "I don't know what it is," he said, carefully removing a capacitor from the radio's circuit board. "But I know what it does. I call it the static. It's a carrier wave, empty, but it's tuned to a specific resonant frequency, the human brain's frequency for fear, for paranoia, for the fight or flight instinct. It doesn't transmit a message, it amplifies what's already there, the loneliness, the suspicion, the anger. It takes the quiet anxieties of our job and turns them into screaming demons." "How do you know all this?" I asked. "I was a radio engineer in the Army a long time ago," he said. "We worked on stuff like this. Psychological warfare, non-lethal weapons. We never perfected it. Looks like someone did." He explained that he had been tracking the signal for the past 2 days, moving east. It had appeared out of nowhere, a perfect, clean signal with no discernible point of origin. It was as if someone had flipped a switch and bathed the entire central United States in a wave of pure, weaponized paranoia. "But who would do this?" I asked. "And why?" "Who knows?" he shrugged. "The government? A foreign power? Some tech billionaire's sick experiment? Does it matter? Look at them." He gestured around the diner. We're the lifeblood of this country. If you can make us turn on each other, if you can make us too scared, too angry, too paranoid to drive, you can grind this entire nation to a halt in a week." The implications were terrifying. A silent, invisible weapon that could cripple a country by turning its own protectors against themselves. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We fight back," he said, a grim determination in his eyes. He held up the circuit board. "The signal is perfect. Too perfect. That's its weakness. A perfect signal can be disrupted by an imperfect one. A dirty signal. A human signal." His plan was simple and brilliant. We would create a counter-broadcast. Not a clean, powerful signal, but a messy, chaotic human one. We went out to his rig, a beautiful old Kenworth filled with custom radio equipment. For the next hour, he worked his magic. He jury-rigged a system to broadcast on a wide, dirty band across all CB channels. And then, we started talking. We didn't talk about the signal. We didn't talk about the fear. We talked about anything and everything. He told me stories about his time in the army. I told him about my kids. We talked about bad coffee, good music, the price of diesel, the prettiest sunsets we'd ever seen. We told bad jokes. We complained about regulations. We were just two truckers talking. It was the most normal human conversation imaginable. We broadcast our conversation for hours, our voices cutting through the clean, silent hum of the static. And slowly, miraculously, the atmosphere began to change. The angry chatter on the CB channels began to subside, replaced by confused drivers asking what was going on. A few of them joined our conversation, their voices shaky at first, then growing stronger. The tension in the truck stop began to ease. The fight near the fuel pumps broke up. People in the diner started talking to each other again. We had given them a different frequency to tune into. We had reminded them of the community, the shared humanity that existed beneath the loneliness and the fear. Our messy, imperfect human conversation was the antidote to the perfect, inhuman silence. As the sun began to rise, the hum on the CB channels finally faded away, replaced by the familiar, comforting crackle of normal static. The signal, whatever it was gone. It was as if a fever had broken. The old engineer packed up his equipment. "It'll be back," he said grimly. "This was just a test, I think. They were testing the range, the effectiveness. Next time it might be stronger." He gave me a nod. "Stay safe out there, Roadhog, and keep your radio on. The world needs more human voices." He climbed into his Kenworth and drove away. I never saw him again. I don't even know his name. I think about that night all the time. I think about the silent broadcast and the wave of paranoia that swept across the heartland. Was it a weapon, an experiment, or something else? I don't have any answers. But I know that the greatest defense we have against the darkness is not technology or weapons. It's each other. It's the simple, messy, imperfect act of two strangers sharing a story on a lonely road in the middle of the night. And I always keep my CB on. Because silence can be a weapon, and sometimes a human voice is the only shield you have. Story 7, The Wait Station Anomaly. My name is Al. I'm a flatbed driver. Unlike the guys hauling sealed boxes, my cargo is out there for the world to see. Massive industrial machinery, giant logs, oversized construction beams. My job is a constant, nerve-wracking calculation of weight, balance, and securing my load with chains and straps strong enough to hold back a titan. I live and die by the scales, and every trucker knows the one place where those numbers are law, the weigh station. Weigh stations are the bane of our existence. They're a necessary evil, a place where you pull off the highway to have your rig weighed and inspected by state troopers who always seem to be having a bad day. You pray your numbers are right, that your logbook is in order. and that they don't find a reason to give you a fine that could wipe out your profit for the entire trip. It's a place of mundane, bureaucratic anxiety. But one night, at a lonely way station in the desolate salt flats of Utah, I learned that some scales measure more than just the weight of your truck and its cargo. They measure the weight of things that have no business being there at all. It was a brutally clear, cold night, the kind of night where the stars look like chips of ice scattered on black velvet. I was hauling a single, massive, custom-forged turbine engine from a factory in Colorado to a power plant in Nevada. It was a heavy load, but a legal one. I had done the math myself. I was just under the 80,000-pound gross vehicle weight limit. I was clean. I saw the glowing "All trucks must exit" sign for the Portadown way station and sighed. It was late, around 3 a.m., and the station was just a small, brightly lit building in an ocean of profound darkness. I pulled my rig onto the massive in-ground scale, the truck groaning under the weight. I watched as the digital display board, the big screen that shows your weight to you and the trooper inside, lit up. My heart stopped. The number on the screen was 114,280 pounds. It was impossible. I was overweight by more than 34,000 pounds. That's the weight of another, smaller truck. It was a career-ending violation. The fines would be astronomical. I would lose my license, my truck, my livelihood. I stared at the number, my mind racing. The scale had to be broken. It was the only explanation. I waited for the trooper to wave me forward for an inspection, to tell me there was an error. But nothing happened. The light stayed red. I picked up my CB mic. "Portadown scale, this is Big Al. You got a copy? I think your scale might be on the fritz. There's no way I'm that heavy." The trooper's voice crackled back, tired and bored. "Scale was calibrated this morning, driver. The number is the number. Shut down your engine and bring your paperwork inside." My hands were shaking as I gathered my logbook and permits. This was a nightmare. As I stepped out of my cab, I did a quick visual inspection of my load. The massive turbine engine was still there, exactly as it had been loaded, chained down tight to the flatbed. Nothing had been added, nothing had changed. I walked into the small, sterile office. The trooper, a man whose name tag read Officer Barlow, was a big man with a flat, emotionless face. He didn't look up from his computer screen as I entered. "Paperwork," he grunted. I handed it to him. He glanced at the bill of lading, which clearly stated the weight of the turbine engine. He did the math. He looked at his screen. He looked back at the paperwork. For the first time, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. "Your paperwork says you should be legal," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But my scale says you're heavy enough to crack the damn pavement. What else you got on that truck, driver?" "Nothing," I insisted. "That's it, just the turbine. Your scale has to be broken." Barlow sighed, a long, weary sound. He looked at me, then out the window at my truck, then back at me. "Listen, Al," he said, his tone softening slightly. "This happens out here sometimes. Especially on nights like this. The air gets heavy." "Heavy? What are you talking about? It's a clear night." "Not talking about the weather," he said, his eyes distant. "This place, the Salt Flats, it's an old place. A lot of things have crossed this land. A lot of things have ended here. Sometimes, things just get on for a ride." I stared at him, convinced he was messing with me. "Are you telling me my truck is haunted? That I'm hauling ghosts?" He didn't smile. "I'm telling you that you are 34,280 pounds overweight, and I can't let you leave until you are legal. You need to figure out what extra weight you're carrying, and you need to get it off your truck. Now I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. You have 10 minutes to solve your problem. If that number on the scale hasn't changed when I get back, I'm going to have to bring in a full inspection team. And they are not as understanding, as I am. He walked into a back room, leaving me alone in the office. I was in an impossible situation. How do you unload cargo that isn't there? I walked back outside, my mind reeling. I stood by my truck, looking at the massive, inert piece of machinery chained to my flatbed. What was I supposed to do? I decided to check the chains, the straps, anything. I climbed up onto the flatbed, my flashlight beam dancing across the cold steel of the turbine. Everything was secure, everything was normal. Then I saw them. The handprints, all over the surface of the turbine engine, clearly visible in the thin layer of dust from the road, were handprints. Hundreds of them. They were the prints of men, women, and children. They were pressed against the metal, as if a crowd of invisible people were huddling against it for warmth or for safety. My blood ran cold. I backed away slowly, my flashlight trembling. Barlow's crazy story about things getting on for a ride suddenly didn't seem so crazy. I jumped down from the flatbed, my heart hammering. I looked around at the vast, empty darkness of the salt flats. The silence was absolute. But I didn't feel alone. I felt watched. I felt surrounded. I had to do something. I thought about what Barlow had said. You need to get it off your truck. I stood by the side of my rig, feeling like a complete fool, and I spoke out into the darkness. Okay, I said, my voice shaking. I don't know who you are or what you want, but this is my truck, and you have to get off. I can't help you. I'm sorry for whatever happened to you, but you can't stay here. You have to go, please. I felt a sudden gust of wind, though the air had been perfectly still. It was a cold, sighing wind that seemed to whisper past my ear, and then it was gone. The feeling of being watched, of being surrounded, vanished. The oppressive weight in the air seemed to lift. I looked at the turbine engine. The handprints were gone. With a trembling hand, I climbed back into my cab. I looked at the digital display of the scale. The number now read 79,860 pounds. I was legal. I sat there, stunned into silence, until Officer Barlow came back out, holding a steaming mug of coffee. He glanced at the scale, then at me. He took a slow sip of his coffee. Looks like you solved your problem, driver, he said, his face impassive. What was that? I whispered. Pioneers, he said, staring out into the darkness. A wagon train that got lost out here in the 1850s. They were trying to take a shortcut to California. They ran out of water. None of them made it. Sometimes on cold, clear nights they get confused. They see the lights of the highway, the trucks. They think it's a new kind of wagon train. They're just looking for a ride west. Looking for a way to finish their journey. He took another sip of coffee. They're harmless. They just have weight. The weight of all that sorrow, all that unfinished business. You did the right thing. You just had to ask them to leave. Politely? He walked back to his office. A moment later, the light on the scale turned from red to green. I put the truck in gear and pulled off the scale, my mind completely numb. As I merged back onto the highway, I looked in my rearview mirror. I could have sworn I saw them just for a second, at the edge of the darkness. A crowd of faint, shimmering figures, men, women, and children in old-fashioned clothing standing by the side of the road watching me go, before fading back into the desert night. I made it to Nevada, but I was never the same. I sold my rig a year later. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't look at my cargo without wondering what else I might be carrying. What unseen passengers, what forgotten sorrows were adding their weight to my load. Because I learned something that night at that lonely way station in the Utah desert. Every trucker is hauling a ghost. The ghost of the road, the ghost of the past. And sometimes that weight is more than any scale can measure. सजेस्टेड न्यू नॉलेज बिल्कुल पेश है आठवां हिस्सा। इस कहानी को भी मैंने आपके 22,000 लफ्जों के टारगेट को ध्यान में रखते हुए पूरी तफसील, गहराई और एक अलग किस्म के डरावने माहौल के साथ लिखा है। मिस्टर चिल चैप्टर्स 10 new most disturbing true trucker horror stories, Part 8. Story 8. The Hitchhiker Who Pays in Warnings. My name is Earl. I've been driving the same route for 20 years, hauling cattle from the ranches of Montana down to the feedlots in Texas. It's a long, lonely drive, a straight shot down I-25, a road that cuts through the heart of America's empty quarter. You learn to appreciate the solitude, the vast, silent landscapes of Wyoming and Colorado. But you also learn that emptiness is never truly empty, and that sometimes the strangest cargo you ever pick up is a passenger. Every trucker has a rule about hitchhikers. My rule was simple: never. It's not just about safety, it's about insurance, liability, the law. In 20 years, I had never broken that rule, not once. Until a cold, wind-swept night just south of Casper, Wyoming. The landscape there is otherworldly, especially at night. Just rolling empty hills under a sky so vast and dark it feels like you're driving on the floor of the ocean. I saw him from a long way off, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, his thumb out, illuminated in the sweep of my headlights. He was just a silhouette, but there was something about his posture that was wrong. He wasn't just standing there. He was waiting, as if he knew I was coming. My first instinct was to keep driving, to stick to my rule. But as I got closer, I saw him more clearly. He was just a kid, maybe 19 or 20. He was rail-thin, wearing a light jacket that was completely inadequate for the biting wind. He wasn't carrying a bag or a sign. He just stood there, shivering, his face pale and desperate in my headlights. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the loneliness of the road. Maybe it was the memory of my own son who was about the same age. Maybe it was just a flicker of pity. Against my better judgment, I slowed my massive rig to a halt, the air brakes hissing in the profound silence. I leaned over and pushed open the passenger door. "Get in," I grunted. "It's too cold to be out here." The kid scrambled into the cab, bringing a gust of frigid air with him. He was even thinner up close, his face gaunt, his eyes large and dark and holding a strange, unsettling intensity. He huddled in the seat, rubbing his hands together. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse and dry. "Thank you, sir. You're a lifesaver." "Don't mention it," I said, putting the truck back in gear. "Where are you headed?" "South," he said vaguely. "Just south, as far as you're going." We drove in silence for a while. I tried to make small talk the way you do. Asked him his name. He just shook his head. Asked him where he was from. He just said, "A town you've never heard of." He was polite but distant, his eyes fixed on the road ahead with an unnerving focus. He seemed to be listening to something other than the hum of the engine. After about an hour, he spoke, his voice sudden and sharp in the quiet cab. "You should pull over at the next rest stop, the one about 5 miles up the road. You need to check your rear passenger side tires." I glanced at my gauges. The tire pressure sensors were all green. "Tires are fine, kid," I said. "Sensors say they're holding steady." "The sensors are wrong," he insisted, his voice gaining a strange authority. "The inner tire on the rear axle, it has a slow leak. The pressure is dropping, but not fast enough to trigger the alarm yet. In another 20 miles, the heat buildup will cause a blowout. At your speed, you'll lose control of the trailer. It will jackknife and send you into the ravine on the east side of the highway." I stared at him. His description was so specific, so detailed. He wasn't guessing. He was stating a fact. A cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I had a wife and 2 kids. The thought of a blowout at 70 miles an hour was one of my deepest fears. I decided to humor him. or maybe to humor the fear he had just planted in my mind. 5 miles later, I pulled into the deserted rest stop. I got out with my flashlight and my tire gauge. I walked to the rear of the trailer. The outer tire looked fine. But when I knelt down and reached in to check the inner tire, I felt it. The rubber was soft, spongy. I put the gauge on it. It was down by 30 pounds. The kid had been right. The leak was slow enough not to trigger the alarm, but it was there, and at highway speeds it was a ticking time bomb. It took me an hour to change the massive tire in the freezing wind. The whole time, the kid just sat in the cab watching the road. When I finally climbed back in, exhausted and covered in grease, I looked at him with a new sense of awe and fear. "How did you know?" I asked. He just shrugged, his dark eyes never leaving the road. "I hear things," he said softly. "The road talks. You just have to know how to listen." We drove on, the silence in the cab now heavy with unspoken questions. I was no longer just giving a kid a ride. I was in the presence of something I didn't understand. About 2 hours later, as we were approaching the border of Colorado, he spoke again. "There's a storm coming," he said. "A bad one, a whiteout blizzard. It's not on the forecast. It's going to hit the mountain pass just south of Cheyenne in about 90 minutes. It will shut down the highway for 2 days. You need to take the exit for Laramie and find a motel. If you try to push through, you'll be trapped." I checked my weather radio. The forecast was clear. The satellite image on my GPS showed no storm clouds. "The forecast is clear all the way to Denver," I said, my voice less certain this time. "The forecast is wrong," he said with that same chilling finality. "The storm isn't coming from the sky. It's coming from the mountains. It's an old storm. The kind the radio doesn't know how to predict." I thought about the tire. I thought about the ravine he had described with such certainty. I made a decision. I took the exit for Laramie. I found a cheap rundown motel on the edge of town, the only one with enough space to park my rig. I got a room for the night. The kid said he would find his own way from there. "I can't pay you for the ride," he said as he got out of the truck, "but I can give you this." He reached into his thin jacket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "It's a payment, a warning. Don't open it until you get to Texas. And whatever you do, don't take the shipment of cattle from the Double Bar J Ranch next week. Call your dispatcher and cancel the job. Tell them you're sick. Tell them anything, just don't take that load." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the motel parking lot. I went into my room, my mind reeling. I turned on the TV. An hour and a half later, a news bulletin interrupted the late-night movie. A sudden, unforecasted blizzard had slammed into the mountain pass south of Cheyenne. The highway was closed. A multi-car pileup had already been reported. The road would be impassable for at least 2 days. The kid had been right. Again. I sat on the edge of the cheap motel bed, holding the small, folded piece of paper he had given me. My hands were trembling. Who was he? What was he? A prophet? An angel? Or something else? I made it to Texas 3 days later. I remembered his final warning. The job I had scheduled for the following week was a pickup from the Double Bar J Ranch, a big, important client. Canceling it would cost me money and could damage my reputation. But I couldn't ignore him. I called my dispatcher and told him I had a family emergency and had to cancel the job. He was angry, but he eventually agreed to find another driver. It was only then that I remembered the piece of paper. I unfolded it. It was a page torn from a newspaper, an obituary. The paper was old, yellowed, and dated October 27th, 1988, exactly 20 years ago to the day I had picked him up. The obituary was for a young man, 19 years old, who had been killed on a lonely stretch of I-25 just south of Casper, Wyoming. He had been a passenger in a car that had suffered a catastrophic tire blowout, sending the vehicle careening into a ravine. His name was Jonathan. The small black and white photo showed a thin, serious-looking young man with large, dark eyes. It was him. I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the weather. I had given a ride to a ghost who had died on that very road on that very night 20 years earlier because of a tire blowout. A week later, my dispatcher called me. His voice was shaken. "Earl," he said, "you're a lucky man. You know that job you canceled? The pickup from the Double Bar J?" "Yeah," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "The driver who took your place, he was found this morning. On the side of the road, his rig was fine, the cattle were fine, but he was dead. A massive, sudden heart attack. The doctors said it was a freak occurrence, a 1 in a million thing for a man his age." I hung up the phone, my body trembling. The kid hadn't just saved me from a blizzard. He had saved my life. He had paid me for the ride. He had paid me with a warning. I don't know why he chose me that night. Maybe he saw something in me. Maybe he knew I was the kind of man who, against his better judgment, would stop for a lonely kid on a dark road. Or maybe he just spends his eternity on that stretch of highway trying to prevent the same fate that befell him, paying for a ride he can never complete with warnings from beyond the grave. I still drive that route, but now I listen. I listen to the road, I listen to the wind, and I always keep my passenger seat empty, because I know that the highways are haunted by the ghosts of those who never finish their journey. And sometimes, if you're lucky, one of them will pay you for the ride. Story 9. The Fresh Produce Shipment. My name is Jackson. I'm a reefer man. That's what we call the drivers who haul refrigerated trailers. My job is to transport the cold chain: ice cream, frozen meat, pharmaceuticals, and fresh produce. It's a high-stress gig. You're not just driving, you're a mobile life support technician for your cargo. You have to constantly monitor the temperature, listen for any changes in the hum of the reefer unit, and pray you don't break down in the middle of the Arizona desert with a trailer full of melting ice cream. The golden rule of hauling a sealed, refrigerated load is simple. You never, ever break the seal until you reach the destination. It's a rule I've followed religiously for 12 years. Until the one load that made me break it, and I wish to God I hadn't. The job came from a new client, a high-end agricultural distributor I'd never heard of called Viridian Organics. The contract was unusual. The pay was exceptionally good, almost double the going rate. The cargo was listed as proprietary hybrid produce, live spores. The pickup location wasn't a typical farm or warehouse. It was a remote, unmarked facility deep in the swamplands of southern Louisiana, a place that didn't show up on any commercial maps. The instructions were strict and bizarre. I was to arrive at exactly 2 a.m. I was to communicate with the loading crew only via my CB radio. I was not to leave my cab for any reason. The trailer was to be pre-chilled to a precise 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Not 33, not 35. And once the trailer was sealed by their team, I was not to open it, not even for a customs inspection, until I reached a designated research lab in Baltimore, Maryland. They provided me with a special waiver signed by some obscure government agency to bypass any inspections. The whole thing felt wrong, but the money was too good to pass up. I drove my rig down a series of muddy, unmarked service roads, the cypress trees dripping with Spanish moss, creating a claustrophobic Gothic tunnel. The facility was just as strange as its location. It was a series of large, windowless, domed structures that looked more like a futuristic moon base than a farm. There were no company logos, no signs, just a high-security fence and a single automated gate. I followed the instructions announcing my arrival over the CB. The gate slid open silently. I backed my pre-chilled trailer up to one of the loading docks. I watched in my mirrors as figures in full, white biohazard suits emerged from the dome. They moved with a silent, eerie efficiency under the harsh glare of the loading bay lights. They didn't use forklifts. They carried large, heavy, opaque black crates by hand, loading them into my trailer. The process took over an hour, all in complete silence. When they were done, one of the figures sealed the trailer doors with a heavy metallic lock and placed a bright red tag on it that read, "Biohazard, do not open. Extreme spore hazard." Then, they were gone. The loading bay door slid shut. The gate opened. I was alone again in the swamp with a trailer full of secrets. The first 24 hours of the drive were unnervingly normal. The reefer unit hummed along perfectly, holding a steady 34 degrees. The truck handled well. I drove north up through Mississippi and Tennessee, pushing hard to stay on the tight schedule they had given me. The strangeness began on the second night, as I was driving through the mountains of Virginia. I started to feel a strange vibration. It wasn't coming from the engine or the road. It was a low, rhythmic, pulsing sensation, so faint I could feel it more in the bones of my seat than I could hear it. It was coming from the trailer. I pulled over to check the reefer unit. It was running fine. The temperature was stable. But as I stood next to the trailer, I could feel the vibration more strongly. The massive 53-foot-long box was thrumming with a slow, steady, rhythmic pulse, like a giant sleeping heart. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was the new hybrid produce settling. Maybe the crates were shifting. But the rhythm was too perfect, too biological. Later that night, the smell started. It was faint at first, just a whiff. It seeped into the cab through the ventilation system. It was a sweet, earthy, cloying smell. The smell of a greenhouse, of damp soil and blooming flowers, but with an underlying note of something else. Something musky and animal. The smell grew stronger as the hours passed, becoming so thick and overpowering that it made my eyes water. It was the smell of life, but a strange, alien kind of life, growing and multiplying in the cold darkness behind me. By the third day, I was a nervous wreck. The constant low-frequency thrumming was vibrating through my entire body, making my teeth ache. The smell was giving me a pounding headache, and then I started to hear it. A soft, wet, rustling sound. It was the sound of movement, of something large shifting its weight inside the trailer. I would hear it whenever I went over a bump or took a sharp turn. A sound like 1,000 wet leaves being stirred, followed by a soft, heavy thump against the inside wall of the trailer. I called the emergency contact number they had given me. A cold, clinical voice answered. I explained the vibrations, the smell, the sounds. "It is the maturation process," the voice said, completely unfazed. "The cargo is settling. It is a normal, expected part of the transport cycle. As long as the temperature remains at 34 degrees, the cargo is stable. Do not deviate from your course, and do not, under any circumstances, break the seal." The maturation process. The words chilled me to the bone. What kind of produce matures in a refrigerated truck? What kind of live spores create a smell that suffocates you and a vibration that feels like a heartbeat? The final straw came on the last night of the trip somewhere in rural Pennsylvania. I had stopped for fuel. As I was walking back to my cab, I glanced at the side of my trailer, and I saw something that made my blood freeze. The side of the refrigerated trailer, a thick insulated wall of aluminum and foam, was bulging outwards. A large convex bulge about 10 feet in diameter was pushing out from the inside, the metal groaning and creaking under the strain. As I watched, the bulge pulsed, expanding and contracting in time with the slow, rhythmic thrumming I had been feeling for days. Whatever was inside was not just maturing, it was growing, and it was running out of room. I knew then that I couldn't take this thing to Baltimore. I couldn't deliver this abomination to a city, to a lab, to the world. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was wrong. I drove off the highway and found a deserted, abandoned industrial park. I parked my rig in the shadow of a crumbling warehouse. The bulging on the side of the trailer was worse now, the metal visibly stressed, the rivets popping. The wet rustling sound from inside was constant, and it was accompanied by a new sound. A low, guttural clicking noise, like a billion giant insects chattering at once. I had to see. I had to know what I had been hauling. I took a crowbar from my toolbox and approached the back of the trailer. The red biohazard tag seemed to mock me. My hands were shaking, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I broke the heavy lock, and then with a final desperate surge of adrenaline, I broke the official seal. I swung the heavy doors open. The smell that hit me was a physical blow. It was a tidal wave of sweet decay, damp earth, and alien musk. The inside of the trailer was not filled with crates. The crates were gone, dissolved. The entire 53-foot length of the trailer was filled wall to wall, floor to ceiling with a single massive living organism. It was a pulsating fungal mass of pale white and gray tissue. It looked like a cross between a giant mushroom, a tangled root system, and something horribly, vaguely anatomical. Thick vine-like tendrils covered every surface, pulsing with a faint internal bioluminescent light. Large translucent sacs, like giant eggs, hung from the ceiling, the fluid inside them swirling with dark embryonic shapes. And in the center of the mass, a large flower-like structure was blooming. Its petals were made of a fleshy, skin-like material, and as they slowly unfurled, they revealed a cluster of what looked like eyes. Dozens of large, black, glistening, multifaceted eyes like those of a fly, all swiveling to focus on me, the source of the sudden light and fresh air. The chattering, clicking sound intensified, a wave of alien intelligence washing over me. I wasn't just looking at a plant, I was looking at a creature that had grown from spores, in the cold and the dark, into this monstrous trailer-sized entity. The fresh produce was not the cargo. The entire trailer was the produce. It was a mobile greenhouse, a womb on wheels. I stumbled back, dropping the crowbar, my mind shattering. I had been its caretaker. I had been the unwitting delivery man for an alien invasion. As I stared in horror, one of the thick tendrils detached itself from the wall and snaked out of the trailer towards me. It moved with a slow, curious, deliberate grace. It wasn't hostile. It was inquisitive. It reached out and gently touched my boot. I screamed, a raw, primal, mindless scream. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran, leaving my truck, my career, my sanity behind me in that abandoned industrial park. I don't know what happened to the truck or its cargo. I reported it stolen, telling the police I was hijacked. They never found it. It was as if it and the Viridian Organics Company had simply vanished. But I know it's out there, or more terrifyingly, it reached its destination. I see strange reports on the news sometimes. Unusual fungal blooms in urban areas. Strange, unexplainable illnesses. People talking about a sweet, earthy smell before they get sick. I live in a small, quiet town now. As far from the highways as I can get. I don't drive anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I can still feel it. That low, rhythmic, pulsing vibration in the floorboards. And I can smell it on the wind, the smell of damp earth and alien flowers and a harvest that is just beginning. Story 10. The Last Exit. My name is Thomas. I'm retired now, but for 40 years I drove a tanker truck hauling gasoline across the American Midwest. It's a dangerous job. You're essentially driving a 40-ton bomb. You learn to be meticulous, to be cautious, to plan your routes down to the last detail. You trust your maps, you trust your GPS, and you trust the green and white signs that guide you through the labyrinth of the interstate system. My story is about the one time those signs lied. It's about the town that wasn't on any map. a town that was easy to enter but impossible to leave. It happened on a long, grueling haul from Chicago to Denver. I was cutting through southern Iowa on a state highway I'd never taken before, trying to bypass a storm system. It was late, after midnight, and a thick, soupy fog had descended, reducing visibility to near zero. My world had shrunk to the 10 feet of asphalt illuminated by my headlights. I was getting tired, my eyes burning from staring into the gloom. I was looking for a place to pull over, a rest stop, anything. That's when I saw the sign, emerging from the fog like a ghost. It was a simple, old-fashioned wooden sign. "Welcome to Havenwood, next exit." I'd never heard of Havenwood. It wasn't on my GPS, it wasn't on my paper map. But the sign promised a gas station and a motel. It promised light, coffee, and a safe place to wait out the fog. It promised a haven. It was a lie. I took the exit ramp, which curved down into an even thicker bank of fog. When I emerged from it, I was on the main street of a small town. But it was like I had driven through a curtain into another time. The town of Havenwood was perfect. Too perfect. It was a postcard image of small-town America from the 1950s. The buildings were pristine, with fresh coats of paint. There were cheerful flower boxes in every window, a white steepled church at the end of the street, and a classic chrome-clad diner with a buzzing neon sign. But the most unsettling thing was the people. The town wasn't asleep. Even at this late hour, people were out. They were strolling down the sidewalks, chatting on park benches, kids riding bicycles. And they were all smiling, wide, happy, unnervingly vacant smiles. As I drove my massive tanker truck slowly down their main street, they all stopped what they were doing and turned to watch me, and they all waved, a slow, synchronized, welcoming wave. A deep, primal sense of wrongness washed over me. This wasn't right. It felt like a movie set, a performance, but the need for coffee and a break was stronger than my unease. I parked my rig in front of the diner, the only space large enough. As I stepped out of my cab, the smiling townspeople began to approach me. "Welcome, traveler," a man in a crisp suit said, his smile never faltering. "We're so glad you decided to stop in Havenwood. You must be tired. Come, have some coffee. On the house." They ushered me into the diner. The place was spotless, the air filled with the smell of fresh brewed coffee and apple pie. Every single person in the diner turned to smile and wave at me as I entered. It was like being the guest of honor at a party I didn't know I was attending. The waitress, a young woman with bright blue eyes and that same fixed smile, poured me a cup of coffee. "First time in Havenwood?" she asked, her voice relentlessly cheerful. "Yeah," I said, my guard up. "Just passing through." Waiting for the fog to lift. Her smile tightened, just a fraction. "Oh, but why would you want to leave?" "No one ever wants to leave Havenwood. It's the perfect place to rest." I spent an hour in that diner, an hour of the most unsettling, surreal conversation of my life. The townspeople were friendly, but their friendliness was a performance. They asked me questions about the outside world, but they seemed uninterested in the answers. They talked about their own lives in Havenwood, but their stories were generic, repetitive, like they were reading from a script. They talked about the annual town picnic, the prize-winning roses, the high school football team that always won. It was a perfect life, an empty life. I noticed that no one ever stopped smiling, and their eyes were hollow, holding a deep, buried desperation. I finally had enough. I thanked them for the coffee, paid my bill. They refused to take my money at first, insisting I was a guest, and walked back to my truck, the smiles and waves of the townspeople following me like a physical force. I started my engine and continued down Main Street, looking for the on-ramp back to the highway. I reached the end of town and saw the sign. Highway 24, east-west. I took the on-ramp. relieved to be leaving that strange saccharine place behind. I drove for about 10 minutes, the fog still thick. Then up ahead I saw the familiar cheerful lights of a small town. I saw the white steepled church. I saw the buzzing neon sign of the diner. I was back on the main street of Havenwood. I had somehow driven in a circle. My heart began to pound. I must have taken the wrong ramp. I drove through the town again, the smiling, waving people a terrifying chorus of welcome. This time, I paid careful attention. I reached the end of town. I took the on-ramp marked Highway 24 West. I was certain it was the right way. 10 minutes later, I was back on Main Street, Havenwood. I did this 3 more times. Each time I took a different exit, a different ramp. I followed the signs for north, south, east, west, and every single time, after a few minutes of driving through the disorienting fog, I would find myself rolling back down that same perfect, smiling Main Street. The town was a cage. The roads didn't lead out. They only ever led back in. Panic set in. I was trapped. I pulled my rig over and just sat there, my mind racing. The townspeople started to gather around my truck again, their smiles wider now, more predatory. "Looks like you've decided to stay," the man in the suit said cheerfully. "Wonderful. We have a room all ready for you at the motel." I looked at their faces, at the desperate, trapped look hidden deep within their smiling eyes, and I finally understood. They weren't the keepers of the cage. They were the other prisoners. They were all travelers, just like me, who had taken that last exit and had never been able to leave. Their smiles were a mask, a uniform they were forced to wear. They were playing a part in the town's endless, perfect performance. I knew I couldn't stay. I would rather die in a fiery crash than become one of them. A smiling, hollow shell. I had one last desperate idea. My truck was a tanker. It was full of 9,000 gallons of highly flammable gasoline. I put the truck in gear. I ignored the smiling, waving people. I drove to the end of Main Street, right to the edge of town where the perfect asphalt met the fog. I turned my rig around so it was facing the town. Then I got out. I opened the valves on the tanker. Gasoline began to pour out onto the street, a river of volatile fuel flowing down the pristine asphalt towards the center of town. The townspeople stopped smiling. For the first time, their faces showed an emotion. Pure, absolute terror. They knew what I was about to do. "You can't!" the waitress screamed, her cheerful mask shattered. "You'll destroy it. You'll destroy everything." "This place is already destroyed," I said, my voice cold. I pulled a road flare from my cab's emergency kit. I looked at the town, this perfect, beautiful, horrifying prison. I looked at the people, the lost souls trapped in their roles. And I gave them a choice. "The road out is gone," I shouted, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. "But I'm about to make a new one. A road of fire. Maybe it leads to hell. But it's better than this. Anyone who wants to leave, you run. You run now, and you don't look back." I struck the flare. It hissed to life, a brilliant, angry red eye in the foggy darkness. For a moment, no one moved. They were frozen, trapped between the fear of the fire and the fear of this place. Then one of them, a young man, broke from the crowd and ran, disappearing into the fog. Then another, and another. A flood of desperate souls, their smiles finally gone, replaced by the beautiful, terrified, human face of hope. I waited until dozens of them had run past me into the darkness. Then I threw the flare. It landed in the river of gasoline. The world erupted in a silent, whooshing roar of fire. A wall of flame raced down Main Street, consuming the perfect diner, the pristine shops, the white steepled church. I didn't stay to watch it burn. I turned and ran into the fog, away from the heat and the light, following the path the others had taken. I ran for what felt like miles, the sounds of the burning town behind me. The fog began to thin. I could see the stars above me. And then I heard it. The familiar, beautiful roar of traffic. I stumbled out of the fog and found myself standing on the shoulder of I-80, miles away from where I had taken that fateful exit. My truck was gone. The town of Havenwood was gone. It was as if it had never existed. I was picked up by a state trooper who found me wandering, dazed and reeking of gasoline. I told him my truck had been hijacked. I didn't tell him the real story. He wouldn't have believed me. They never found any trace of my rig, or of Havenwood. There's no record of a town by that name ever existing in Iowa. There is no exit off that highway. I don't know what I did that night. Did I burn down a real town? Did I destroy a pocket dimension, a hell of our own making? Or did I just wake up from a terrible, vivid nightmare? I don't have any answers. But I know that dozens of missing persons cases from that area were quietly closed in the weeks that followed, as people mysteriously reappeared, dazed and confused with no memory of where they had been. I lost my job, my truck, my career. But I have my life, and I have my freedom. And I know that there are places on the lonely roads of this country that are not on any map. They are traps, waiting for the tired, the lost, the desperate. They promise a haven, a place to rest. But some havens are cages, and sometimes the only way out is to burn it all to the ground. Outro. The highway is a place of constant motion, a river of steel and light that never sleeps. But in its quietest moments, in the dead of night, on the loneliest stretches of road, that motion can stop. Time can bend, and reality can break. The men and women who drive these roads are the guardians of our modern world, but they are also the unwilling witnesses to its oldest and darkest secrets. The stories you have heard tonight are a glimpse into their world, a world where every shadow could be a threat, and every rest stop could be the final destination. They are a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not always the ones with claws and fangs, but the ones that wear a human face or hide in the silence between radio stations. Thank you for riding along with us here at Mr. Chill Chapters. If these stories have made you think twice about the empty road ahead, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Your support is the fuel that keeps us going. That